If you know who I am, then you know I will not look at these files.
This interview is now being recorded. You came to us. Why?
I already told you.
For the record, please.
I wish to give you intel about my country's information network and operations in exchange for my safety and acceptance into your country.
And what makes you think you have information we would want?
Beyond your intelligence operations, clearly being behind other first-world countries such as my own? Because the mission I oversaw previous to this one is entirely off the books.
Let's roll back to your dismissal of our intelligence network, or even more broadly, your clothes. Not very subtle.
Do you think intelligence agents come into your country, as you would put it, dressed to the nines? We pose as tourists so that no one will be wiser to our presence and our mission.
Well, that didn't work out for you, did it? We've had our eyes on you since you landed at the airport.
Do you really think that was by accident? A man such as myself having been in this practice for 30 plus years. It was by design. I wanted your eyes on us. I remind you that despite all that, I came to you.
We're getting off the subject. The mission you mentioned, you oversaw. Who actually executed it? Alright, forget it. Deal's off. You can return to your country, see how long you live there.
Wait. You must understand. I have worked for my country for most of my life. I will give you what you need. It is difficult. An officer of mine, Sara Keir. I was her boss at the Office of Information in my country.
Anything beyond that?
Sara Keir I met nearly 20 years ago. At the age of 9, her father moved them both to my country. He had come to the state on high-level contract work, overseeing major construction of buildings, the very same things he did back in his homeland of England, where my country had lured him away from with high pay. It was at parties organised by the state that I met them. And her. She reminded me I had always wanted a family, and in particular a daughter, on the better chance she would not follow in mine or my father's footsteps. But despite several attempts, having children was not meant to be for me. Through these state gatherings, we met many more times, and we grew a similar familial bond. She went through our schools, our universities, and when it came time to choose a first career, she came to me, asking my opinion. I want to say I saw the potential, that she was a good fit for an agent, and maybe she was. But I must admit there was probably some selfishness there. I want to have her near me to keep an eye on her. I suggested she work for the Office of Information. She did not hesitate to apply. Her studies made her a good candidate for reconnaissance. She was taught in many cultures, their ways, their history, their artifacts, fluent in multiple languages so she could blend in with relative ease. But I must admit I was more than happy to have her fulfill a position such as that. It would put her in the lowest amount of danger our missions have. After many successful field missions, she had earned her stripes in our organization. Then came the last one. It was handed to me by the state. It was an envelope. The pages were old, worn, slightly damaged due to age, water exposure, and insects. An off-the-record sight of The old government. The one that failed. They fell. Any one of us who has studied that time in our country's history will know the reason that government failed is because it spent every last cent it had. It ran out of money. This project in the frozen wastes of the north was expected to bring in valuable gems found on the earth up there in unhospitable territory. And worse, by the records, it was all true. Some gems were brought back with communication that entire mine shafts were filled with the gleaming stones. And yet, even the records do not indicate why the project was shut down. But it was. The riches the project promised to bring back never were, and the government would fail shortly after. In the transition, this project must have been shuffled in the darker and darker corners of our records, and now the state had found it. They wanted me to send a recon agent to determine if the sites were still there, if the gems were still there. Sara was the first who came to my mind. When I met with her, the morning I briefed her on the mission, she seemed her normal self, confident, cheerful, full of youthful energy. Up until today, I have had very few reasons to use my knowledge of the English language, a difficult thing to master, an even more difficult thing to keep fresh in your mind without constant practice. In my meetings with her, I always spoke in her native tongue, despite her being just as fluent in our language. She often seemed a bit annoyed by my insistence in speaking to her in English, probably partially because, according to her, I pronounced her name wrong. In her tongue, it should be Sara. But my language skills default to Sara. But once we moved past that, she seemed interested in the mission. Perhaps it was because it would bring her more knowledge of her adoptive country. She agreed to it, and we set her up to head to the northern wastes. A plane would fly her near there, but she would have to trek the final miles of the journey on her own. The area is too snow-covered, cold, and inhospitable to house any major infrastructure there. We kept in contact once per day via radio transmission, only once, so as to maintain battery life. The plan was for her to spend 3 full days there, then trek back to the airport on the 4th, where we would pick her back up again. We were near the end of autumn. She would only have that small amount of time to spend on the mission. Any time beyond that would likely result in being unable to get out of the snow cold coming in and the cold coming in hard. But in terms of any ground support, I could not give her anything. The state wanted this operation done immediately and quietly, as off the records as the original project was, so as to not draw the attention of other countries as to what we were doing, or what we were looking for. The journey, the trek into the northern wastes went exactly as planned. The problem with finding anything in the northern wastes is that everything is ever shifting, like the sands of a desert. On the first day, she did manage to find a satellite building belonging to the project. Still mostly intact, mostly buried. A plain, efficient building, inside and out, concrete, pipes exposed and running along the walls and ceiling. But there was not much left there. Record-holding cabinets had become rusted and warped, but any records inside of them had been removed or turned into illegible scraps that littered the floor. Though she said she was unsure if those were scraps of paper or the rust coming off the cabinets. She determined there was enough sunlight left in the day to try to trek a bit further north towards the nearest mountain. Any main facility would have been constructed close to there, as any underground water would have likely been closer to the surface. Very smart of them. and her. But after leaving the building, it was not long before she caught the sounds of something else. There are hardy animals out in the frozen wastes, and even a few humans as well. People who have fled the state, and a few batches of native population. All who have managed to somehow survive out there, though not well. She took cover, but the noises continued, though drifting away to the northwest of her position. She tried to follow and get closer. As the noises disappeared over a ridge, she was able to get on top of it to get an elevated view. What she told me that evening was a surprise, and not the good one. There was a fairly large group of men, she estimated about 50, all travelling north towards the mountain. They had all the supplies needed to get through the frozen waste, but what seemed out of place to her eye was what appeared to be a sarcophagus, a stone coffin holding something, or if her studies on most cultures are correct, someone. She surmised they must have been very important for the stone coffin to begin with. Then to have 50 men escorting their body into the frozen wastes? To what end, she could not say. She could not see any identifiable markings on the men from her lookout point, even through binoculars. But whoever they were, paramilitary or black ops, they were prepared for combat and armed to the teeth. She would need to keep her distance from them. The good thing was they were here for different reasons than her. If they were just here to bury someone of importance or take that person back to their homeland, then they would not get in her way and she would not get in theirs. These men prepared for the evening's rest. The ones carrying the coffin put it down into the snow. In her words, maybe not as gently as they could have. Her radio was off, according to our plan and to her testimony to me later that evening. And yet, after the heavy thud in the snow, her radio began to squeal with the feedback. She ripped it off her belt and pulled the battery to be 100% certain it would remain off. The men seemed to hear it though. They became alerted, formed up, and fanned out. They equipped with high-powered assault rifles. She was only sent with a single pistol in the event of unfriendly wildlife. But her winter camouflage, her high position on the ridge and keeping her distance made it easy for her to creep away, keeping an eye over her shoulder. She snuck back towards the satellite office. The men did not follow. She made camp in the satellite building, then reported to me. When recounting the radio static, she slowed down. She initially spoke only of the static, but in that moment she seemed to realize she had heard something else. A voice, low among the static, not audible enough to hear what it was saying, but something there. I did not like what she was insinuating here. She seemed to be edging towards the idea that what she heard was unnatural, a ghost or something. She has never been a superstitious person, and neither have I. Nor did I have time for something almost certainly not real, and the state expected me to report personally what had happened at the end of each day. But I was gentle, pointed out there's no way to get around that her radio was on when it should have been off. That is why it squealed. She tried to argue a bit, but quieted down as I continued over her. The voice was likely not real, something her memory is making up in the moment, no doubt caused by the isolation out in the waste. I assured her she will be fine if she keeps logic at the forefront of her mind. She softly pressed again that there was a voice. I told her, even if there was a voice, it was probably just an added broadcast from the airport she had landed at. That would be why the voice was so low, the static so high. It would have barely made it to the radio due to some freak weather-related circumstances. She quieted down after that and said she had nothing left to report for the night. I signed off and began making my way to the president's office to relay my report. I decided to leave off the talk of voices in the static. It was nonsense and something unneeded for my report. I gave them it, almost exactly as she had to me. They seemed satisfied and said they looked forward to my next report. They did not seem troubled by the PMC's presence. In hindsight, I wonder if they knew something. Something I was not being told. I had worked for my country for nearly all of my adult life. I was the head of the Office of Information. Yes, we used interrogation techniques to gain information from spies who had been found in our country, and yes, those techniques were not kind. But it was always in self-defense. They came uninvited into our country to steal our information. The rest of the world paints us as savages, striking violently at random without cause to foes and friends alike. Rampant corruption abound, all lies, propaganda. But it is not true. It was not true. I knew the truth. Because I was leading that office. I thought day two for her was better. And worse. Upon packing up and leaving the satellite facility, she found tracks. Not her own, and judging by the smooth texture of the sole, not in the PMC. One of the natives. She followed them for a time, found they were tracking the PMC she had come across, but both the PMC and the native had moved on. Good. She trekked northward, being sure to steer clear of the path from the PMC. As her wits had told her, the main facility was north, near the mountain. It's still mostly above the snow, but around it all she said there were idols and markings, undoubtedly left by the native people after the site had been abandoned. The idols were those meant to instill fear in both wandering others and the tribe. She had not studied the people of the frozen waste, their culture. Not that there was much to study. They have intentionally kept themselves separate from the modern world. Any attempts at making contact are met with violence, and so not much is known about their culture. But in her words, these separated cultures all seem to tend in similar ways for certain things. A mark of how humans are the same across the globe, even when there is no contact. Their jagged edges and use of blood red or dark colours made it clear these markings were meant to ward off anyone from entering the building. With no time for superstition, and perhaps because of my dismissal of her claims the previous evening, she went into the facility without hesitation. Concrete building, plain, efficient, not much in the way of paint. Whatever may have been there had all crumbled away by now. Remnants of what were probably posters hung on the wall. Propaganda of the old government, no doubt. What she found there was a treasure hoard of information. The files were old, weathered, but still legible, for the most part. All still here, all abandoned. We knew the project was shut down. But under normal circumstances, the files would have been moved back to the capital, or at the very least, burnt to leave as little evidence as possible. She had to question why the files were still here. Did they leave in such a hurry they did not get the chance to do what they were meant to? Or was it somehow forgotten? Or maybe, with the former government's collapse, they felt that there was no point. Maybe they had lost hope the country would be able to come back at all. The treasure hoard of information, but most of it was worthless, and she would need to dig through it to find what she was looking for. The exact location, the coordinates of the mine shafts they were working on. Plenty of records of soldiers and workers being brought from the country to this area. Day after day of new recruits, each checked in with the amount of food or rations to support the workers. A large project was growing here. But finally, she found a clue. Not the mines, but a hand-drawn map of the building, what offices were which. She went to the overseer's office. That would be where the most important information would have been stored. The door was closed, locked, but aged and brittle. A little force destroyed its lock. More files. But among them, she found what she needed. The mine shaft's location, its exact coordinates, or at least the one they had been using to enter. The documents they had written up theorized the cave, being as large as it was, probably had multiple entrances. But they only needed the one. Having found what she needed, she began to move on. But one file on the overseer's desk caught her attention. It was a journal, open to one of its last pages. She took the moment to read it. It was the overseer's. A declaration the project had come to a failed ending. There were not enough men to continue the work. The government was going to collapse at any moment. And with no other men being brought from the state, they could not bring the jewels they had on earth back. That evening, the overseer gathered all the remaining men in their common area, worn out from all of these events. He thanked them for their work and their sacrifice, told them they would finally get the rest they so desired. At that, the overseer and the other project leaders gunned them all down. He and the other project leaders would be allowed to live, return to whatever home remained for them, with the understanding they would never speak of this project again, for the glory of their government about to fall. Another entry on the page afterwards seemed to become rambling. She guessed he had a few drinks in him by then. He wrote of vultures within their country, circling the dying carcass of it already, looking to seize power. He would be damned before he let others benefit from the old government's projects, its hard work, blood and sweat. Maybe they already were damned by her. No indication as to who this her was. Sara was enthralled, wanted to know more of the situation here. She spent the rest of the day parsing that journal, but could not find any direct mention of a woman ever being involved with the project. With the sun fleeting, she decided to make camp in the main building for the night. It would provide better protection from the elements than the remote building did or the outside could. She found a sleeping area, the cots, all on wheels. Maybe some kind of medical ward. She made a report to me in that room. Sometime during the evening, she awoke slowly to the sound of squeaking metal wheels. She realized the cot she was sleeping on was being moved. Trying to not draw attention, she only opened her eyes a slit. She could see one of the PMC men was moving her out of the medical ward room. To where? Who knows? But she could not let him get too far. She bolted upright, making a move for her gun, but the PMC, surprised by her movements, quickly disengaged and sprinted behind the wall. By the time Sara was able to get off the cart carefully and approach the corner, he was gone. Somewhere in this dark, sprawling, unpowered building. But she could not just go back to sleep. Now she was being hunted. She tried to follow his most likely path. After a few moments, the man seemed to regain his footing. He began to taunt her, speak to her through the echoing halls. He told her they had captured, interrogated her man, the one following them. He was loyal to their people. He did not give up anything of value, but they hurt him. The PMC seemed to think she was one of the natives. With nothing useful from the native scout, they killed him slowly, then dragged his body here, literally cut him open so his blood seeped into the snow all the way, a trail that none of them could miss. Pinned him up outside with all their warnings, made him just like their idols, a message to leave the PMC alone. And even better, they're hauling one of her people with them. The stone sarcophagus contains the one they called the Witch Mother, pulled from her crypt. Sara believed the reason he was giving all this information was in an attempt to bring down her morale. Believing she was one of the natives, this desecration of their people and culture is a common tactic against prideful groups. But she was not one of theirs. The information helpful, but not demoralizing. And her more modern training made it possible to push past the words and hear his movements nearby. She tracked him to a corner room, swung round and put a bullet in his head before he could lift his gun. A look of surprise and terror locked on his face, now dead. She made a sweep of the rest of the building, checked the perimeter as well, but he seemed to have been alone. The area secure, she made an emergency broadcast to me, relayed all that had happened as I did to the president. Him and his members seemed annoyed at the witching hour meeting, but they took in what was relayed to them and thanked me for my continued service. Day 3. Our final day of the recon mission. From the file record. With the mine entrance coordinates, she began her trek there. Outside, she found the native scout's body. Though covered in a light layer of snow, the blood trail from his body being dragged was still visible and stretched to the south as far as she could see. The PMC was right. There was no way anyone could miss this. And at that, she began to feel more nervous. She moved on as quickly as she could, afraid the natives may happen upon the body with her still near, blame her for the murder in a tick. She made it out of the area without issue, but she began to wonder if it was because the natives had not found it yet, or if they were keeping their eyes on her from the woods all around, waiting to strike. Or maybe they knew she was not involved and would leave her be. She held on to that last thought as much as she could, keep her nerves steady. A few hours later, she made it to the coordinates. What was not hard to find was that there was another satellite building here. It made sense. They would house the workmen here instead of having to trek hours each day. What was hard to find was the mine entrance itself. With snow levels ever changing and even the rocks slowly shifting, it was possible the entrance was completely gone. It took some time, but only half covered in snow, she was able to find a human-sized entrance, only 1 or 2 wide, 1 tall. Stepping inside, the world behind disappeared quickly. No sunlight was getting in, and the soundscape changed. But most importantly, rounding the first corner, the wall was littered with gems. Coloured and none. She had found it. The jewels still here. With that part known and secure, she left the cave again. They had sat here for 30 plus years untouched. They could wait a bit longer. She went back to the satellite building, tried to unearth more on the project, since so little was known about it. She went looking for a records office. What she found was worse. A pile of bodies, decomposed, mostly gone. But their uniforms, workers of the old government, were still there, still identifiable. In the room was a communique, not fully written, meant for Morse. The natives had attacked our workers in the mine, were gaining the upper hand. And the message stopped there. Whoever wrote it was probably killed then, but a fight had happened. The few that made it out probably fled back to the main building. The overseer had mentioned the soldiers were worn out from the battle. They left them with too few men to pull the gems, just as the old government was about to collapse. The project had failed. The sun setting, and not wanting to stay in a building with a bunch of rotting corpses, she moved to the mine entrance, made camp out of direct sight. She had to come back to the entrance though to radio in. That is when she learned. About midway through day 3, my office was suddenly visited by a number of the president's cabinet, though not the president himself. They told me to come with them to give them a full debriefing of all that had happened in the mission so far. An odd request, but I followed. In the car, I was struck with something blunt. I remember an instant wave of pain, and then nothing. When I awoke, I was in a solitary room, strapped to a chair, my hands and fingers outstretched in devices. I did not know what was going on. Initially, I thought it was one of our enemies. I could see a camera in the upper corner of the room looking at me. Not too different for this setup. I called out to it, knowing they were listening, wanting to speak with someone in charge. As time went on and no one came, my theory that it was an enemy state became solidified. I began to shout obscenities, defiant words that I would give them nothing. So it shocked me. In response to these statements, the person who entered the room was the Prime Minister. A loyal man through and through. My theory no longer added up, nor did the situation. I tried to ask questions as to what was going on, but he ignored them, sat down across from me, and explained he wanted me to tell him everything that had happened in the mission thus far. I assured him, I told him and the others everything, and he waved his hand. Other men entered the room, standing by me. They did nothing, but their presence and my position were enough to cause intimidation. He asked again, and I started from the beginning, told him all the events of the first day. When I finished that portion, he looked to the man to my left. In a swift movement, they slammed a device down on the first joints of my hand, breaking all of them at once. The pain! I screamed. When When the shock lifted, and I was able to hear what was going on in the room again, he started. Said I had not told him everything, left out something. I did not know what he was talking about, what he wanted. He looked at the man to my left again. That was all I needed to know. More was coming. That half second of anticipation is the worst. The same man, the same device, now on the second set of joints. Broken, pain, scream. In agony, something seemed to jostle free from my mind and my mouth, the radio burst that Sara had first talked about. Where I had waved away a superstitious nonsense, a freak event of topography and weather conditions, he took it in. He looked at the man again and nodded. Nothing came after. He heard what he wanted. He asked then about day 2. I told him everything. Everything I had already mentioned in my report and the attack that came late at night. By then, I had been able to pull my wits together enough to pay attention to him. When I mentioned the PMC statements on the witch mother, he shifted. That was what he was looking for. I finished that day's events, and he seemed satisfied. He thanked me for being forthright, after a little coaxing, but to be sure coaxing would not be needed in the future, that I will not spare any details. He would leave me with one more reminder. He looked at the man to my left again. No. The device brought down on my hand itself, and then my arm broken instantly. I was barely awake anymore. I heard the door close. I would guess he left. My mind drifted. Nothing coherent anymore. The day's events, the recalling of them. Sara. A full thought bursted in. Something wrong. In that moment, I hoped that Sara would not return from the mission, not see her country like this, not see me like this, that she would run and never look back, or even not survive. At that time, I thought that would be a greater mercy. The Prime Minister had indeed left, but the other men remained. Judging by my injuries later, they beat me until I was fully unconscious. When Sara radioed in, she was not met with my voice, but someone else's. Someone she did not know, nor could identify. Someone who had access to proper state credentials and passcodes. They told her my attention had been needed on another mission. In my stead, they took Sara's report. When Sara finished relaying the answers she had found, she inquired about the transport out scheduled for the next day. They told her the mission had been extended. She would need to track down the PMC, try to gain access to the sarcophagus, identify or image the body for them. She insisted the timeline for the mission was chosen before the snow and cold closed off any means of escape. Staying there even one more day would likely be deadly. Trying to gain access to the body would likely mean death. They did not respond to her. After what I was put through, I'm almost certain if she had tried to return without fulfilling their mission, it would have likely meant death as well. Maybe she knew that. She tried to sleep, but did not get much. The next morning the sun rose and she began. She had to track down the PMC. She went back to their less known location, was able to track them from there. They headed northwest around the mountain. Along their trail she found a death site, many dead natives, and some of the PMC as well. A battle had happened the previous night. Examining the tracks, the blood, what she could find, the natives seemed to attack first from the woods, likely in retaliation for their dead scout the PMC had desecrated. The natives lost the battle, but many survived it, fleeing back into the woods. The PMC had lost a number of their men as well. Not as many, but more than 10 from what she saw. The PMC had left supplies and crates all around. The numbers dwindled. They likely pushed on as soon as they could regroup. Left everything that was not absolutely necessary. Unfortunately, the sarcophagus was taken with them. She followed them, bending round the mountain, then found they had already gone into it. A different entrance. She gathered herself, pulled her gun, and went in. Quietly, carefully, she tried to follow the snow they trekked in. Not sure how close they may be. The entrance cave wound around, gems also coating its walls. It then opened into a large cavern. Here, the snow tracked only a bit further up what seemed to be a large, naturally formed ramp that led to a higher level in the cave. She trekked up it. As she approached the next level, she could hear echoes of voices. She slowed down, prepared herself, peeked above the ledge so she could get an idea of what she would be dealing with. But the level was empty. No one there. But on that level, there were old man-made structures leading even higher. No idea how far up this cavern may go, she sighed. A bit of relief, a bit of annoyance. Something below caught her eye. She ducked back down to the first level to look at it. It was a string of light. Coming up from below or falling from above, she could not tell. The light stayed there, wavering a bit, then grew, and with it a loud crashing and rumbling. The area the light seemed to hit was tearing apart, and the light grew larger and larger. On instinct, she ran, a mixture of running, tripping, and sliding back down the ramp and between rock faces. Large chunks of the above levels began to fall all around her, barely missing her. One small chunk managed to strike her back, ripping open her jacket and leaving a gashed wound, but her adrenaline running at full. Outside the bump, she did not notice it at that time. She made it back to the entrance she had come from, made only a glance to see the light was still growing wider, getting closer. She ran back out the entrance, no longer looking back. As she reached the mouth of the cave, a force of wind threw her forward into the snow. The world spun. But after a few moments she realized she was still here. She tried to turn herself over, then felt the pain of her wound. She sat up and tended to it in the short term, kept glancing back to the mountain's exterior, but nothing seemed to have changed there. She waited an hour, maybe two. Nothing changed, no sound escaped, and no person came out. She, very carefully, crept back into the mine shaft. The walls were singed. The gems once coating it, gone, destroyed. She made it back to the open area. It was still there, but all around it was now gone. It was a hole dropping off from the entrance. The levels above completely cleared out. And from what she could see, no bodies remained. With nothing left to do, she radioed in, explained what she had seen, though she could barely understand it. When she finished, there was a silence on the other end. Finally, they came back and congratulated her on a successful mission. They told her she could now trek back to the airport. Her transport will be waiting. Sometime that evening, I awoke in a medical facility. My hand and arm had been placed in a cast to heal. I was released and driven home. Inside my house, on a table, just inside the entrance, was a letter, handwritten by the president himself. He thanked me for my service, tried to explain why my treatment was necessary, and a reminder to not leave any details out of future reports. He said I would find my office just as I had left it and awaiting me. I still held my position, and the letter did nothing to explain why this had happened. I could not understand. I had done everything right, stood by my government as it was thrown slander of its operations. But it was too soon to make rash decisions. I returned to the office the next week. The same day, Sara also came in. We sat in my office, doors closed, looking at one another across my desk. I cannot imagine how I looked at her, bruised, arm in a sling, weaker than I had been before all this. She looked many years older, a shell of who she was before the mission. There were no words exchanged that meeting. Nothing that could be said to make it easier, make it all make sense. But we both understood. With time, I healed, though I cannot say that I fully recovered, or that I ever will. Her energy and youth came back. We both managed to find ways to sleep again. But slowly we grew a plan, a need to get out. And when the mission to perform reconnaissance in your country arrived, we agreed to have her come and me with her as a supervisor to make sure all the details are forwarded to the right members. And that leads us to now. We throw ourselves at your mercy. If we try to go back after having escaped our security details, we will not be allowed to live. We have information on mission logs, tactics used, interrogation techniques. All we ask for is refuge and protection.
Well, that's all well and good, Mr. Andre, but we only have room for one of you in our ranks. Knowing that, who would you choose to stay?
Protect her! She has more of a future than I do.
Funny. She said we should take you. As she's young, she can go on the run.
No, please do not put her through that. It will only end terrible.
It's alright, Mr. Andreva, calm down. to our country. Now, please, walk through the door. You'll find Sarah and some of our other members who will wish to speak with you.